Hey all, it's KR, King of D&D Homebrew, talking today about how you can adapt your homebrewed sandbox world to the activities and interests and classes of your players. Because here's the thing, I always stress from the very first video I ever made, you don't have to complete your whole world at once. In fact, you don't want to. You want to sketch out some settlements, the geography, some of the major personages, and then let your players play. Let them decide where they want to go. You throw out some story hooks, but you're not railroading. They may go in a direction you never expected, and they are going to choose character classes and backgrounds and everything else, and their playing style that's going to dictate or influence, let's say, where they're going to go, which storylines they're going to pursue, and those are the ones that you want to develop. That way you're not in a situation where you've developed some, elaborate cities that somewhere in your world and the players ignore it and you're feeling like, well, that was a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. First of all, you always have later to have them go there or whatever. You don't want to force them, but you can make it very attractive for them to go there. But also it just shows you that what you want to do is just have enough when the players go forward, when they start to explore your world and they're making decisions. They're the protagonists of your world. That's where you start to concentrate on. And this video came about for a couple of reasons. One, I've been playing this in-person game now for 1 year, just past the 1 year anniversary. My players are at 8th level. And we were sort of reflecting on, the way the campaign evolved, the characters, people that had died, those that had never died, all that kind of stuff. And it struck me how, differently the campaign evolved than I had originally thought, because the players are the ones interacting with the world, right? The old joke about that D&D would be so easy if it weren't for those pesky players. But the other element is I'm always looking at different YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, looking at blog posts, and I came across a whole bunch that talked about kind of the narrative style of D&D as opposed to the old school, GM tells you where to go, what to do, the railroady types or whatever, where these are games, both game systems and game styles, where the GM and the players kind of collaborate and create a storyline and, a narrative together, and whether or not this is good or bad. And then there's one person very prominent in this world for 20 years who suggests over and over, there is no such thing as a sandbox. You're telling players where to go. So only in a narrative style, only when the players are truly, creating the story, do you have a sandbox campaign? And, whether that's true or not, I don't want to get into arguments about that. But it always, for me, makes me think about, well, what are the ways in which the activities of the players is actually shaping the world that I'm creating? And, the first one is where they decide to go, what they're interested in. So in my campaign, I set up this main city of Dramos. It's not the main city of the wilderness, but it's where I imagined that they would start. All their characters had backgrounds there. And then to the north of the Badlands area, I have this Maneth, which is very small, kind of wide open gambling town on the gateway to the Dwarven Mountains. And then to the south is Elsinox, which is this huge city, 15,000 people, very large for my world. This is, it wasn't the idea that I had. I'm starting them up in Dramos, but it is, I figured they'd go there eventually. I did work on this city quite a bit. These are the major personages of my world. And the Flatlands, this is this kind of on the other wrong side of the river, as it were, where all the outsiders and whatnot, the rogues and everything live. And then some villages sprinkled in and out, and then some specials and all that kind of stuff. Well, what happened was when the players went on their first expedition, they took this ale up to Maneth, and then they started negotiating with this guy, Wesgar, who ran this Wesgar's Gilded Palace, this gambling hall. And the players were very intrigued by him. And they asked, is there anything more we can do? So he said, I just came up with something. I had some idea, and I just had put it in the mouth of Wesgar, as opposed to someone in Dramos who came into Zodi's Tavern, which is where I always start my adventures. The Zodi, in fact, who used to be kind of the major NPC to start off the campaign, has been almost non-existent in this campaign. I've just had to accept that. It's been Wesgar, and it's been the affairs of Maneth. So what happened was I had to shift my focus and develop Maneth. I developed kind of a pretty elaborate city map. I did a video on this showing how I developed this. I've developed all these different sites, the way the different clans that operate in my world. These are like the families they're called. They call them clans, but anybody can enter one. It's kind of think of the mob families, right? And although some of the clans are very lawful good, but that's just the way it works in my world. And so I adjusted them to develop them much more in detail in Maneth, because that's where the players wanted to hang out. Don't force the players to, oh, I've got Dramos, the main city worked out, which I didn't have that much detail. I had, way more than I had for Maneth. But I always try to follow my own advice, which is to keep it simple. To not sit there and go, okay, I've got all this work. I got every single NPC, and I got all the quarters of the town, and I got 10 storylines that are exclusive to Dramos or whatever city. I have storylines. Now, again, I have the sewer system one, which doesn't really work in Maneth. They just have kind of open ditches and whatnot. But I had some sort of wilderness kind of things that I could adapt. I could just take them and place them outside Maneth. The players organized this expedition to go to this druid and get her weed that everyone wanted, but she didn't like dealing with humans, and she's a dragonborn green dragon druid and everything. So the players did this. They went on a mission. They helped her out, and so they all along this river. I took some adventures that I had just I kind of created in my spare time, all that kind of stuff. Standalones kind of thing, and I just moved them to this river so that I could use them. I spent the time making them. I could use them, but it was adapted to where the players were. They weren't going to be hanging around Dramos. I have this whole elaborate thing down in the barren hills, this orcs, and I've done this before. I showed in earlier videos, Kurok, the Avenger, and the players have never gone there. In fact, one time I tried to get them. I just put the bait out there. They just ignored it. They were too busy doing other things. All centered around Maneth and this area over where Maris, the druid, is, and their swamp and these mountains, and they started to explore kind of the mysteries of the Illyrith, this ancient race. And so I'm deciding, okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to adapt this, these orcs. Yes, they're the barren hills as their ancestral homelands. I'm going to adapt it and put it over in these hills over here to the east of Maneth, because I want to use this. I want them to get involved in this, but I have to adapt it to their activities. The other element is the party composition. So in this particular group, we have a light cleric, we have a monk, an arcane trickster rogue, a barbarian, and a ranger. So that's martial classes, right? You do have an arcane trickster, but not much of a spellcaster, and then a cleric. You don't have a wizard, a sorcerer. So one of my players was like, I noticed in your world there's a lot of divine, not just divine magic, but divine storylines. I have these gods that are fighting one another. Well, part of the reason I did that, I was adapting it to the fact that the only spellcasters they had in this group, the only one really was this divine, that was a major spellcaster, was this cleric. And the cleric was kind of a leader of the group. He was kind of driving the action. He was thinking of ideas to do. The other players were more than glad to go along with it. Some of them were less experienced at D&D. Others just like to look at their character sheets, do their character. They're not thinking of the big picture. So he was driving the action. So I took some ideas I had about this ancient god and his god, which is Pelor, and sort of this conflict. And then I have this Illyrith, this ancient society. And so I kind of shifted things. I adapted it away from a magic-centric, arcane magic-centric, to divine magic. I want them to be, intimately involved in it. I also had this ring, which was kind of a greed thing. It had powers. It was this ancient Illyrith thing. It's a long story. But I adapted it to this monk and this rogue are very greedy. And they pointed this out in their backgrounds. They're both from tough, sort of urchin-esque backgrounds. They said that, their kind of flaws are, we'll always go for the gold. We're always, the one monk is like stealing stuff from people. It's kind of both humorous and maddening to the players. But what I did was I adapted the storyline of this ring to be a greed, sort of you deserve better, its mental effects played upon the backgrounds of these characters that they had created. And I'm not trying to manipulate them. I'm trying to make it interesting for them. I mean, they still have the same saves and they still have the same chances to investigate this and look into the history, and then I give clues to this and that. But I knew the connection to what they described as their background, this urchin sort of, I've always been screwed. All I want is to get rich and powerful and show everyone who laughed at me when I was running the streets wild that I made something of myself. And so the whole focus of this, first this one ring and then some other magic items that try to take over your mind and influence you because there's this ancient god trying to rise up, kind of a Sauron type thing. I created that so that, not to manipulate, but to make it attractive to them. Because if it's totally opposed, if it's like a thing that only gives power to arcane powerful magic users. We have an arcane trickster, but they don't have that much magic. It's not interesting to them. The ranger's favored terrain is jungle. So I created this pocket jungle area. The ranger is very interested in this, wants to protect this. It's a tabaxi, the cat people. I knew that this character would be interested in it. I knew this would motivate them. I knew this would make the game more fun for them if it were related to something they're interested in. If you have a tabaxi ranger whose preferred terrain is jungle and you say, okay, everything's going to be set in the desert, Another element is to adapt your world as the players advance in levels, right? You have the different tiers of play that you see in the Dungeon Master's Guide. 1st through 4th is local hero. Then you get higher up at 5th through 10th. And then you go into these 11th through, I think it's 16, and then 17 to 20, the super high gods on earth or whatever. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that distinct. I mean, you adapt this to your players, right? But the idea behind tiers of play that they're trying to get at is the focus of the players' activities, the levels of, creatures that they're going to encounter and the level of things that they're going to be worried about. You're going to adapt those to the players. So 1st through 4th, a lot of it is just surviving, right? Your first level, you're vulnerable. If your group is surprised by enough creatures and they hit you, you could be dead. So you're doing kind of very short-range missions, you dungeon crawls or exploring something or doing a caravan type thing or all the classic tasks that we give to low-level characters, just like an entry-level worker, right? Get certain tasks. Then as you rise your way up through a company, your tasks change. You become a supervisor, when you get to 5th, 6th level. But also you become more interested in, you can do more difficult missions, dungeons or temples or the things that the 1st to 3rd level characters would just be killed. And you're adapting that. You're not introducing those storylines until the players are ready to do them. You're not introducing necessarily NPCs until the players, it makes sense for these NPCs to even bother. Because another thing I always do is give the players renown. People start hearing about them. People just come to them when they get to certain higher levels and say, hey, could you help me do this? Or I've heard about you. They're not coming to you in your first level. Hey, I heard you're just a first level scrub. No, nobody cares, right? And so the players realize as we build renown, we get more fame or infamy, as it were. And it also earns you things. It earns you the right to go talk to the king or his vizier or, whoever, the high-level wizard or something as you get level. And you don't worry as much about things like, tracking your food. Again, they might have food and water or, your equipment or how much gold you have. The players eventually get, if you give out any kind of treasure, they get all this gold. And now, again, my players spend it. They bought this tavern. They bought this ruined fortress that they're turning into like an adventurers guild. So they're doing activities. They're using their money to build a stake. It's in Mammoth. They're transforming Mammoth, this sleepy little, well, I wasn't sleepy. It was like this Vegas style, but like Vegas in the desert, right? It was out of the way. And they're transforming it into a hub of commerce and order because as their renown grows and as they get up in level, they're affecting the society much more so when they were just sort of observing it from 1st to, say, 5th. But beyond that, they begin to have an effect. People are drawn to where they are. They bought this tavern. They creating this adventurers league. Adventurers are coming. Merchants come to sell to the adventurers, and then business people and whatever. And then these clans, these Ascanos clan, who are like the business class, realizes, hey, we're going to invest in Mammoth, and they're buying up properties, and the players are competing because they're gentrifying this. It's a whole storyline. And all of this came out of the fact that they chose to go to Mammoth. And then as they went up in level and went up in influence, both from their renown and their cash, they started to affect things. And I'm adapting that. I'm saying, okay, their influence is in Mammoth. What would happen? People would say, well, this might be a place to be. Look at these adventurers, these high-level characters that are doing really well. We want to be there too. And they've set up this adventurers league. They're collecting missions, and they're exploring some of the farther reaches of the northern areas of my world. And so I'm adapting that. And then the final element of all this, now, depending on when you run, I don't run the really super high level campaigns for a variety of reasons. One, it takes forever to get there, and it becomes a little unwieldy. And, there's arguments that can be made about whether this D&D, 5e especially, breaks down at high levels. But what the players can do is they can retire their characters to start up new ones, and those characters then become part of the world. And I let them run a little bit. You know, I won't have their characters do crazy things or whatever, but they have a new character that they're running. And then they have these characters that become part of the world. And I adapt it. All their adventures are there. All the experiences they had are there. But now they're part of this world that I created. And they both control the character and watch the character at the same time, just like they actually do for the characters that they're actively running. And this gives this sort of continuity, sort of organic growth, this sort of narrative, as it were, to come back to my original thing. When I read these blog posts and listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos about this narrative versus sort of this GM that controls everything, and how does that work, and what's fun and what's not fun. And I'm saying if you adapt your world to what the players are doing so that they're interweaved in the storyline, they've created this storyline, and then they move on and have a new character, but retire one, because we've already had one character retire. It's a druid. And Dragonborn druid who went to work as Maris's apprentice, and he's kind of trying to, get involved with her. And every once in a while we roll to see how their romance is going. It's all rated PG, but it's humorous. He's now a part of the world, and the players talk with him. And I play him like that character that's very similar to what the actual player did. So remember, when you create a homebrewed sandbox campaign, just create enough to get started. Watch what your players do. Look at the storylines they go for. What is the composition of their party? What with the backgrounds and classes in that party, what would they be interested in? And develop the world along those lines, and the players will fill in the rest with their activities. And if that's helpful to you, love to see you subscribe. Love to hear your comments, those that run a homebrewed sandbox, how you adapt your world to your players' activities. But of course, most importantly, my friends, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you choose. Tell somebody else about it.